The latest election data from battleground states shows more Democrats are taking advantage of mail-in voting than Republicans. A record number of people are expected to vote by mail this year due to the pandemic. And when it comes to absentee ballot requests, Democrats are outpacing Republicans in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Michigan and Wisconsin are also reporting a surge in requests. The first ballots in the country were sent out Friday to voters in North Carolina. At the beginning of the month, the state had more than 618,000 requests. More than 52% were from registered Democrats. Less than 16% came from Republicans. For more on all of this, I want to bring in Sarah Ewall-Wice. Sarah is an associate producer for the CBS News Political Unit, and she joins us now from New York City. Hey, Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, what's motivating these large numbers of Democrats to request absentee ballots? And is there an advantage to voting by mail that either the campaigns are seeing?
Yes, so Democrats across the country, especially in these battleground states I've been speaking to, have been talking about how that is a huge part of their get out the vote effort, making sure that Democratic voters have a plan and emphasizing the vote by mail option. They see it as a way for voters to both vote early ahead of the election, but also they see it as a safety measure that voters can take if they're not comfortable heading to the polls on election day. With that said, you mentioned North Carolina, where we've seen a vast number of more Democrats voting by mail, or rather requesting those absentee ballots to vote by mail versus Republicans. The same goes in Pennsylvania and in Florida. If you look at the state of Pennsylvania, of the more than 1 million Democrats have requested absentee ballots, that's about 68% of all requests so far before those ballots start to go out later this month. By comparison, of that number, Republicans have about 24% of those requests as of right now. Same thing goes in Florida, where over 900,000 absentee ballot requests have been made ahead of those ballots starting to go out in the Sunshine State. 48% of those have come from Democrats versus only 31% by Republicans at this time. So it really shows Democrats are taking advantage of this early and thinking about this earlier. Of course, there's always concerns about making sure that those ballots will then get back in time on Election Day.
Well, I'm also curious, Sarah, and I wonder if you can tell me more about this. Let's say that Democrats and Republicans vote in equal number in previous years, but Democrats are largely voting by mail and Republicans are voting in person. Can that skew what looks to be the election results that we are starting to see initially in favor of President Trump, and then when the absentee ballots are counted or the mail-in ballots are counted, that those races might in fact go in a different direction? Are we worried about the discrepancy between what sorts of results we'll get right away from the in-person traditional voting versus what usually takes a lot longer, counting those mail-in ballots?
I think that is definitely a concern, and that's a part of the messaging. Democrats are reminding people this is not going to be election day. This is going to be election week, potentially, with all those ballots still being counted. Some states cannot start counting ballots until after polls close, so they're not going to be tabulated for quite some time. With that said, we have seen recent polling where, of course, more Republicans than Democrats are likely to vote on Election Day. That reflects in those absentee ballot requests so far. I think what messaging from Democrats has been, you need to make sure that you hold off on jumping to conclusions on election night and really waiting for all of those ballots to be counted. I think that Democrats, though, are trying to make the effort for their voters who are requesting absentee ballots to do so early so that they make sure they're physically back in by their deadlines, whether it's be postmarked or at their clerk's office by Election Day. So this is something that we haven't seen in past election cycles, and it is something that people are definitely trying to make sure voters understand when you're watching the returns come in on election night. If more Republicans are voting in person, those results might be more easily easier counted right away. And then, of course, there could be an influx later from these Democrats who voted by mail. I should add, though, that while the president has not been really urging vote by mail efforts. He's in fact been talking about voter fraud when it comes to vote by mail. without supporting evidence. What we've really been seeing is that Democrats and Republicans on down ballot in terms of officials have been encouraging voters to take advantage of either vote by mail or in person. So while the president has been saying one thing, Republicans further down the ballot and in some of these states have been saying take part in whatever option you are most comfortable with, including vote by mail.
Yeah, important message for all Americans out there is to definitely vote. So, Sarah, we're entering the final stretch of the 2020 campaign season. As you heard me say, some people are already starting to vote. We know that President Trump and Joe Biden's teams have been taking different approaches to reach voters during the pandemic. Can you tell us how their strategies compare, and where will we be seeing the candidates themselves in the final run-up to Election Day?
Right. So we will be seeing the candidates back out on the campaign trail, especially starting this week. Joe Biden has been doing a lot of his campaigning online throughout the spring and summer. His campaign promised he'd be back out in the field, and we will be seeing that coming up. Tomorrow is Labor Day, and he's going to be headed to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He was also in Pennsylvania last week. His running mate, Kamala Harris, will be heading to Milwaukee for the first time tomorrow. She'll be in Wisconsin at the same time as Vice President Mike Pence, who's also headed there for Labor Day. President Trump is actually headed to North Carolina again after being there last week on Tuesday. And then both Joe Biden and President Trump will be in Michigan later in the week. This will be Biden's first trip back to Michigan on the campaign trail since the pandemic really shut down the country. He was there, one of his last stops on the trail in March was in Michigan ahead of their presidential primary. And then both candidates will be headed back to Pennsylvania on Friday to commemorate 9/11. Of course, that Flight 93 went down in Western Pennsylvania on that tragic day. While the candidates are going out in the field, the Democrats and Republicans on the ground have been taking diverging approaches when it comes to these final get out the vote efforts in the less than 60 days we have until the election itself. What we've been seeing and hearing from Democrats and party officials in specifically battleground states on the ground is they're going to be keeping a lot of their efforts online. They've been making thousands of calls. They've been doing text campaigns. They've been holding virtual events since March. And they believe that that effort has been working. And they also are saying they don't want to risk going out into the communities with the coronavirus still being what it is right now, and that they don't believe that the voters will hold that against them. At the same time, though, Republicans we've spoken to in multiple battleground states have started to go out and do these public events again. They are back knocking on doors. I spoke with an official in Arizona, and she said while they'd been doing a lot of virtual events over the spring and summer, some of the feedback they had been getting was that Republicans wanted them back out in the community to be listening and to what they had to say. And with that feedback, they're starting to do that, taking some precautions. They say they're wearing masks when they go out into the communities, practicing social distancing, but really they have gone and started to ramp up the on-the-ground, in-person efforts where Democrats are saying that their virtual efforts have been working amid the pandemic.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how big a deal it was that Hillary Clinton didn't visit some of those battleground states that she ultimately lost in the last election. And then in this case, whether or not those physical visits will even matter, given that the country is in such a different place given the pandemic. Mm-hmm. All right, one quick little last question for you, Sarah. Campaigns obviously ramp up their ad spending after Labor Day. We always see this. You've been following this aspect of the 2020 election cycle closely. What can you tell us?
Right. So post-Labor Day, we're going to be in that final stretch, and there's going to be a lot of money spent both by the campaigns as well as those super PACs. Bless the people in those battleground states. I don't know how they do it watching TV. They're going to be inundated if they haven't been already. But what we know is that Joe Biden currently has reservations for television ads in about $149 million between Labor Day and the election. That's in 15 states. Of course, that could all change as they shift things around moving forward. President Trump, by comparison, has $147 million in ad reservations for television in 11 states between Labor Day and the election. And we've really been seeing a vast variety of ads. Just in the past week, we've seen ads from both candidates attacking each other, but also talking about the issues when it comes to Biden. He went after Trump in one of his recent ads on Social Security and Medicare, perhaps looking to get some of those senior voters. He's also been talking about the coronavirus and the need for a national response. And he released an Obamacare ad speaking about health insurance. That's something Democrats have definitely been leaning into between now and Election Day, talking about the need for that. President Trump releasing a number of ads also just in the past week where he's been linking Biden to the radical left and accusing him of wanting to defund the police, something that is not accurate. Biden has said the opposite. But he's also been touting it's rebuilding the military and that he's been helping with safety and making the country stronger. And another ad that he's had going after Biden, Spanish ad, is where he's been touting the economy and how that could change under a Biden administration. One of his stronger points when you look at polling, one of the issues that he still has high points on for some is the economy.
All right, Sarah Ewall-Wice, thank you.